the first thing I would like to talk about a little, Laura, is dealing with now. What are your projects now? What is making you busy at the moment?
Well, yeah, we are always working, and in particular, working with clients on helping them on their strategy. Before the pandemic, we would, fly to clients' locations. They would come and visit us here in Atlanta. We'd fly around the world quite frequently, but we haven't been doing that the past year. But this technology we're on right now, Zoom, has turned into really be a great asset for us. We're able to meet with people around the world and do what we always do, is provide the strategy and talk them through the reasons why the positioning strategy, we suggest for them is the best direction. And so this has really allowed us to continue doing what we love to do, is that help clients build their brands right here in the mind of the consumer.
Mm-hmm. Aren't you tired of this Zoom thing? Because some people is a little bit tired of it and identify it with the pandemic and doesn't like it very much. How do you feel about it?
Sure. I mean, I think it is definitely being, luckily we don't do it all day, every day. My husband works for a large company, and all of the meetings he used to have face to face are now on a Zoom, or my kids were in Zoom all day for all their classes. And I think that can be terribly difficult. But for us, it's a couple times a month that we get to work in a short session with a client. And it really does allow us to do that interaction with them. That is an incredibly important part of the process, because it's not just seeing the strategy on a piece of paper, it's bringing it to life through discussion, through visuals, and through talking it out. So although that said, I do think, and we had an in-person client last week, it really was nice to talk and sit face to face at a table. And I think, half of our business will go back to that, but I see some of it still continuing on the computer to meet with people and get some of the sessions done this way.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, now you mentioned a minute ago that now things are kind of changing. We're getting out of the pandemic. Things are getting slowly, but back to normal. Is there a word or a phrase that would identify you at the moment, that would define you at the moment, your state of mind? How do you feel about things now?
Well, I think better. I'm feeling better about lots of stuff. With some of the fear behind us about the pandemic, we've been vaccinated, and luckily, my close family and friends, didn't have too much problem with COVID. So, I think I'm feeling better and hopeful. That, we're going to great things ahead. And, really the technology, we've all learned a lot more about technology. I've always loved technology, but allowed me some time with the technology, as well as to reconnect with family. I've got 2 teenagers, and they were stuck at home with us for a while, which was nice. It was a lot of us, in a small space, but it was also nice to reconnect.
Yeah, for a change, it was nice. Okay, of course, better is a very good word to be identified with at the moment. But if there's one word that identifies you and your work and your the very long career that you already have developed, is positioning, of course.
Of course.
What to say? What do you have to say about the concept right now? How it has evolved, how it is evolving, how it should be used now, and especially how relevant it is for the new generation of marketeers, how they are coping with it and using it.
Absolutely. Well, you're right. I mean, this is the book. This is the idea that has defined the Ries brand, and now the Ries and Ries brand. The idea about positioning, and it really did change the way people thought about marketing. Marketing used to be, and advertising in particular, it was us communicating out, right? What the product was about, What the benefits were, and advertising back then was much focused on creativity, entertaining the consumer. But what positioning did was kind of flip it on its head and say, no, it's not just communicating out. The most important thing is right here inside the mind of the consumer. And owning a position, if you will, in the mind is the key to success. If your brand can own leadership in your category, well, that's the most powerful position there is. If you're not the leader, you've got to position yourself against the leader by being the opposite. And that's where all those positioning ideas came from of occupying a hole inside the mind of the consumer and starting not with who you are, but where are the holes in the mind? And how can you fill them with your brand and your marketing strategy? And so that is a very simple explanation of positioning. And if you listen to that, you realize that it's just as important today as it was 50 years ago, without a doubt. At the end of the day, whether your brand owns a position in the mind, now the categories have greatly evolved. Think about Zoom and Peloton, some of the new ones with the pandemic, and Uber and Amazon that have come along with the internet. Many things have changed. Actually, that's the most exciting thing about branding and marketing is that there's always new categories. We wrote a book, The Origin of Brands. The opportunity is building brands in these new categories that are always coming about. So the categories, yes, change, but the idea about positioning doesn't. The tactics definitely change. And we'll, I'm sure, talk about in a minute about, PR and advertising and things like this. But the tactics, obviously, with the introduction of the internet, the tactics of actually, communicating with consumers and the media and other people has greatly changed in the last 40 to 50 years. But the end idea and the end goal is still the same, is to get right here inside the mind.
So it is not an outdated concept. It's still pretty relevant.
Absolutely. It is still relevant. You still need to build your brand in the mind. And the best way to do it is by owning a narrow, focused idea. And in particular, being a pioneer in a new category. I mean, it's exactly what we see today. With Spotify, with the iPhone, with Amazon, with Uber, with all of these companies. They were pioneers. They were first, not always in the marketplace, but they were first right here inside the mind of the consumer. So driving that idea and being, focused is also incredibly important.
Mm-hmm. Okay, how has one of the factors that didn't exist, of course, when positioning concept was developed and set in the minds of marketing professionals by your father, is social media, which is a new factor.
Sure.
In relation to the concept, how they interact together, how social media influences positioning, how they can work together, or is it a problem or not?
Well, for sure. Social media, and I think you really can, classify it as a new tactic. And really, what is social media? Instead of people talking face to face, now they're communicating on the internet. It really is a basic driver of word of mouth. And, there's influencers in real life and there's influencers on social media. So I think it's an extension of what happens in the real world, just on the internet. And, some of the, understanding and tactics surrounding it, but it really is an extension of something that used to happen in the real world. And now, much of our life is happening online as well. And it goes back to something incredibly important and what we talked about 20 years ago, and that is the power of PR over advertising. Advertising is just not trusted. It's not believable. It's what you say about yourself, and that isn't believable in the eyes of the consumer. Advertising at best can reinforce and remind people of something that they already knew. What do they trust? They trust third-party endorsement. They trust what their friends tell them, what they read in trusted media, about reviews and talking about newness is an important driver in terms of word of mouth and media coverage and PR in general. So absolutely. And I think you'll see what also is interestingly playing out in social media is paid versus not paid. The reality of, many of these influencers that are being paid large dollars to promote brands, I mean, eventually people kind of catch on to this and much the way celebrity endorsements and advertising. You know that Tiger Woods is being paid by Buick to be in that ad. And if he was promoting it on social media the same way, I mean, you don't believe Tiger Woods would be driving a Buick, do you? I don't think so. And so the believability and credibility is always an important role, whether it's in advertising, social media, or anything else.
Okay. Well, now changing the subject a little bit. Your company, Ries, has an office in China.
Yeah.
Been some time ago. How long?
Over 10 years. Yeah, we started back in 2009 and traveled there a couple years before. Getting to know the country and meeting people. We have a fantastic partner, Simon, over there, and it's been fantastic.
That's what I wanted you to talk a little bit about. How is it the office going? How the business is going there, and especially what have you learned about positioning in such a different market and in a country with such a important culture and so on? What new things has brought to you to have this experience in this market?
Well, it was very interesting for me in particular to see how positioning took hold in China. Obviously, the market opened up not that long ago, right? To having consumerism and competition and all of these things. So positioning, is a relatively new concept there. It's less, about 20 years old, if you will. So they're so excited about it, much the way, positioning was an exciting and controversial type of idea back in the 70s here and in many places around the world. So it's exciting to see how it's taken fire and it's taking off. And like you said, in a country that is in some ways very different than ours, but at the end of the day, it's very much the same because people are the same. They have minds and you still want to build a brand in the mind. Now those brands might have very different names, but at the end of the day, it's the same idea. They win or lose based by owning something, by pioneering new categories. So it's been really interesting as well to work with our partner, who is an expert in the local business and market and brands and consumers and competition. And we collaborate with him. He summarizes the idea and what's going on there, and we apply the principles. It's the same. The principles and the idea of being first and owning a market and trying to be the leader and being the opposite of the leader if you're not the leader. I mean, all these things just play out in exactly the same way. So yeah, we've been fortunate. We've been working with some very large companies over there, like Great Wall Motors, and helping them really expand their Haval brand, which is their SUV brand that became the leader in economical SUVs. Again, by narrowing the focus and doing the opposite. Everyone was launching sedans, and they launched an SUV. So seeing strategy play out is always an exciting thing.
Okay, and any plans to go to other countries to open new markets?
We have what's been of course we travel around the world into 60 countries and have some relationships with other consultants in countries, but the big office that we do have, as we talked about, is in China. Now what's great is our long-term, we have a long-term contract and partnership with Great Wall, and they're looking to expand into many other countries. So we're excited to partner with them, and they're looking and moving into Europe and other places in Asia. And so we'll be helping them and hopefully opening some more offices ourselves.
Well, let's see. Good luck with the venture. Well, let's talk along the conversation. I would like to bring on several bywords of marketing at the moment and see what's your take on it and how do you relate them to the positioning concept. One is purpose, which is very much in the minds and in the mouths of marketeers and agencies in later years. And how do you see it? Do you see it as a positive factor for positioning? How would companies deal with these things for it not to be a problem or it is an advantage? How do companies deal with it in terms of position?
I think it of course is a part of any brand, and that you can define it, particularly if you have actually a strong brand that is an integral part of. When you're a company in many different businesses, it's hard to really define what your purpose is. Everyone at the end of the day, and I think particularly in running your company, you have to, help support your employees about feeling good to be there. At the end of the day, I do think they feel good about being and working for the leading company in an important category that is doing good things. And giving back is always, an important part of most corporate structure. Getting recognition for it, is another angle to that. But if you think about companies, Patagonia or Tom's Shoes that have really made their purpose in giving back, whether it's shoes or environmentally focused, when you have a focus, I think you can then better define what then the purpose is and find one that really closely aligns so that your employees and your consumers, and as well the media, can talk about it and help expand the brand and the way people think about it. But purpose alone, I don't think is enough. It's got to be connected to what that brand is and what it stands for. And you got to hope that, you got to remember, who the competition is and how are you going to differentiate from that competition.
Okay. One thing that perhaps doesn't differentiate anymore, I don't know what you think about it, it's this customer-centric mantra that everybody brings on. And I think it doesn't make any sense anymore, but I don't know, how do you feel about it?
Well, companies never want to go out and say, you want to care about your customers, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, and you would never say that they don't matter. But you don't want your customers to define your strategy, and you don't want your customers, telling what you should or shouldn't do necessarily with your brand. They just know. What customers are very bad at is predicting the future. And so they're fine at telling you exactly where your brand stands with them right now, how they feel about it, if they buy it, if they don't buy it, and, why they might say that. But what you ask them, what they want in the future or what they think your company should do in the future, they're not the best gauge of that. I think it really does belong to the experts within the company. And then, in working with, people like ourselves that understand how the positioning works to know what the best strategy for the company is. For example, I mean, if you think about way back in the day, Toyota, the world's largest car company. But what was Japan known for? Well, they were known for, inexpensive, reliable cars. And that's not a bad thing, but they did want to expand the brand. They wanted to launch into luxury vehicles. Now, guarantee it, they did customer research and they said to the customer, you love Toyota, don't you? And the customer said, yes, of course I do. And they said, would you rather buy a Toyota Supreme, a more expensive Toyota from the company or a Lexus, a company, a brand you've never heard of at a much higher price point from Japan? Well, the customer will tell you, and if you are a customer-centric company, you'll always pick the line extension strategy. That the Toyota Supreme or Ultra would be the better customer strategy because that's what the customer wants. Well, at the end of the day, that wasn't a good idea. That wasn't based on positioning because Toyota owned something. To go into a new category, you need a new brand name. You need a name like Lexus that could then define that new category. Instead of doing what many companies do, like Kodak, for example, went into a new category, digital photography, using their Kodak brand name, right? The traditional film photography brand. That just doesn't work. And that's, the biggest obstacle, I think, when you think about being too customer centric, is it can push you down the road of believing line extension is the right choice, when at the end of the day, and when it comes to positioning, and more importantly, when it comes to the mind of the consumer, it's absolutely the wrong long-term choice.
So consumers shouldn't be a very important factor in innovation. That should be a bet made by the company itself.
When it comes to deciding when you need a new brand, for example, I think relying on the customer now, they might be very interested in luxury cars or digital photography, but those new categories really do demand new brand names. And that's what companies have the opportunity to do, to launch those new brands. And at the end of the day, it goes to make the home, brand even stronger. I mean, Lexus has done great things for the Toyota company. Even second brands, you think about YouTube has done great things for the Google brand. Having multiple brands, and that's really one big idea for the 21st century, where we saw most big successful companies in the 20th century were single brand. IBM and GE, they had a single brand on many, many businesses. And while that was okay, because there was limited resources and domination and not the same globalism we see today, in the 21st century, that's not going to work. With globalism, with the opportunities for entering markets, it's a multiple brand world. The companies that do the best and will succeed are those that have multiple brands. And you think about the world's largest company, Apple. It's not one brand on anything. They have a brand for each category. It's iPhone, it's Macintosh, it's iPod, it's iPad. Each of these are dominant in their individual categories.
Okay. Talking about categories and brands, you've said that consumers, mind more about categories than brands. Could you elaborate a little bit? Because I think this is an interesting point. I would like you to elaborate a little on that.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating point, actually, because, we're so-called the branding experts, and we're saying that brands don't really matter. Right? Well,
you must live with that contradiction.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's true, because what brands are the shorthand, if you will, for the category itself. And so while, they don't talk in categories, they talk in brand names. It's the category that those brand names represent that gets people excited. No one gets excited about the Red Bull brand. They're excited about the category energy drink, and Red Bull dominates that category. The way Coca-Cola dominated, cola, or dominates cola. But what's the problem with Coca-Cola today? Is that the Coca-Cola brand is diminished? No, it's stronger than ever. The challenge that Coca-Cola faces is the slow diminishment of the category itself, of people not wanting to drink as many soft drinks because of sugar or artificial, sweeteners. And these are what's driving people away. And the issue with the brand, it's the category itself. You live or die based on the strength of your category. But consumers are excited about Uber, right? About Spotify, about YouTube, and all of these things. That's what they get excited about. And Netflix, right? It was the opportunity to stream, the first streaming content company. And so while, at the end of the day, it's a very strong brand, it's because that category that they pioneered and that they dominate inside the mind is the big idea.
Okay, you've mentioned before, you talked a little bit about the advertising PR conundrum or debate or whatever, or battle.
Yeah.
I would like you to analyze the situation now. You wrote that book a few years ago. Maybe you're planning a new one on the new situation. I don't know. Also, I would like you to bring another factor into the equation, and is the problem with fake news. I mean, there's too much information going on, not always reliable. Well, how these things are combining together? How do you analyze the situation now?
Sure, it's become a lot more complicated, right? Than simple PR versus advertising.
A new book is needed.
I do think that, as consumers, well, one interesting story. At the dawn of the internet, and we were all dialing up to get onto AOL, and I still remember the excitement. And this was an exciting phrase. You've got mail. I mean, you got to that computer, and oh my goodness, if there was something in your inbox, it was yippee yippee yay. And people were so excited. They read everything, they opened everything, they couldn't wait to get everything. And then, of course, the spammers came, right? And today we have exploding inboxes. We put all sorts of technologies to filter them, to delete them, to mark them as spam, and trying to sift through them to get to the good stuff. And we've become very sophisticated in understanding what's real, what's not, what they want to read, and what they don't. I think you'll find the same way with content, if you will, in terms of understanding what is a reliable news source and what isn't, what is, obviously paid for and what isn't. There'll still be some of it out there, but I think, people get much more sophisticated as time goes on, and that's what we've seen. But at the end of the day, it has always been, because there was the same thing. There were paid pages in a magazine, if you will. But at the end of the day, there's always been a spectrum, a continuum between absolutely, Super Bowl ad, clearly advertising, to the highest form of, media, if you will, like the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, of unbiased reporting, non-paid for reporting. And so, in between there's all sorts of, variations. But at the end of the day, it's all about credibility. What is, just coming from yourself, what you are saying about yourself versus what other people are saying as a third party endorsement of your product or service. And what is most important to understand is when to use these, because they're both, all these tools can be helpful. And they can be helpful depending on where you are in your brand life cycle. So the key idea being is when you are launching a new brand, advertising is a waste of time. It's a waste of money because it's not believable. People won't even look at it. They won't register it. And if they do, they don't believe it because they never heard of you and they're not going to believe your claim. And so why we say that, not to mention that advertising for a new brand then diminishes the PR opportunity. Diminishes the opportunity for the media to talk about you, for consumers to talk about you with each other. I mean, you got to take advantage of the one thing you have at the start. You're new, you're unknown. People can talk about you and tell their friends about you before they hear about it, and they feel special for knowing about it beforehand. And they do so credibly, right? That's the bottom line. And that's where you see the gray area, I think, online between, when you're paying someone and when you're not. And so, there's some of that. But I mean, again, if you have a very strong idea and an exciting new category, there is some benefit in all of this. Now, at the end of the day, when your brand is strong and established, what happens is you run out of PR potential. No one's, posting about the new cola drink I've just found called Coca-Cola. And so when brands are established, I mean, think about, Amazon these days is spending and Starbucks spending a lot of time on advertising. Advertising has two purposes. It's one, to reinforce your brand right here in the mind, to remind people of your strength, of being the world's, largest coffee house, of pioneering that idea, like Starbucks, and Amazon being the, the online marketplace, right? And so that is also one, to remind people, and two, to defend your position from competition, to keep the competition out, to raise the noise level so people don't think about the competition. And so it is a defensive mechanism. At some point in the life cycle of, hopefully you get to be at the power of position of leadership that you can then use that advertising money to defend your position in the mind.
Yeah. Okay. And do you think that it's better used now? I mean, advertising, better used now that maybe 20 years ago, because of course the position of companies now it's very different, because there's much more information about it. They should be much more open. There's much more transparency about the going ons of company. They cannot hide behind anything because everything is known. Do you think advertising is better used now, or it's more credible, or do you see it is in a better shape that maybe at the beginning of the century?
Advertising always has its challenges, and in terms of people are always trying to avoid it. No one's looking forward to getting some good advertising. The only time of the year we get excited about it is in the Super Bowl. Our American football championship, when the advertising is just as exciting, sometimes more exciting than the game itself. So, advertising always faces the challenge of people don't want it. They deal with it many times to get content. But, what do we see now? People are paying Netflix so they don't have to have any advertising. Television was the main way that, advertising got to people because people love television. And they had to sit through those ads for the most part, and to get that entertainment. And today we happily pay, right, $14.99 or more for Netflix to have no advertising. And so the challenge of advertising has been the same, is that people don't want it, and it's getting easier and easier to avoid it. Now, what I will say is the opportunity for advertisers, and what they need to do, even more so than ever, is the oversimplified message. It used to be, there were 3 channels, and people would sit through a 60-second advertising that would go into a lot of detail about a brand or company. And people would get engaged with that. They're never going to do that. I mean, you have a quick second online, or, before a pre-roll, before a YouTube video to get a message across. And so it really does have to be oversimplified. And more important, and you asked about, how positioning has changed. And there is an important point. Positioning talked mostly about words. Obviously the end goal is owning a word in the mind, but you see behind me this thing called the visual hammer. And what we found is that even more so today, that the visual has become increasingly important, that it's the combination of using a visual to drive the idea, to drive the word into the mind, that is so crucial. And we talked about in advertising, when you do have that split second, nothing delivers the immediacy, the emotion, the way a visual does. So you have, for example, the lime in the top of the Corona beer. Well, lime signifies Mexico. And Corona became and is the leading imported brand in America. Obviously, there's been a rise in the category of Mexican food and Mexican culture in America. But they really, honed in and hammered that idea, because they're not the only Mexican beer brand. They hammered the idea by using a visual that communicated their difference and their credibility and their authenticity. And that's incredibly important, the authenticity of a brand.
Okay. Well, of course, you have even one book talking about the importance of visuals for brands. But now we are kind of in an era of the resurgence of voice, podcasts, and so on. How there's a kind of conflict, or no?
The rise of what? I missed that.
The rise of voice. Sorry, because the podcast phenomenon and so on. Voice is getting more and more important.
Absolutely. Well, that's true. I mean, I think, talking about, and actually the other book there is Battle Cry. I mean, having the slogan that is said actually in a memorable way, using alliteration, using rhyming, so that, you hear that repetition. And actually, Al, for many years, talked about the importance and the power of radio advertising, because without being distracted by visuals, you really do listen to what is being said, what the words are being said, how they're being said. And so, having the two in combination works incredibly well together. So while you have a visual to quickly remind you of something, you also have a way of saying it that also communicates that idea. So when Coca-Cola, for example, says they're the real thing, that has a very strong emotional component to it. And it also triggers the visualization in the mind. when you hear words, you think in the pictures, and so that brings to mind the iconic Coca-Cola bottle that represents that brand in the mind.
Mhm. Okay. Well, there's been much talk for these 2 years that we've been living with the pandemic about the changes the situation is bringing on people, that we are going to be different from before or whatever. How do you see it? First of all, do you see it that you're becoming a different person from before the pandemic? And do you see it as a general phenomenon, or we will go back to what we were?
Really interesting question. I mean, having lived a while, you have a certain perspective on things. And I think we've all lived through a very traumatic experience. And I think we all have this, worldwide memory of it, much the way we had the 9/11 attacks here in America, where it's, a very defining moment that we all, felt we experienced it together, right? And it was just a great shock to everybody, to the markets, to the system, to our emotion, to our health. And so in the same way, I think we have this defining moment. And the way generations before, from, world wars and, massive natural disasters, it's just one of those big defining moments that, we will remember, and we have a sense of that. Also, that we all experienced it together, and we'll tell stories to the future generations about it. But what you do see is the resiliency of the human species, the resiliency of us to really, we are survivors. And we do, fight on to another day to make things better for us and for the future generations, and to learn from it, and to put new policies, procedures, strategies into effect to protect ourselves and to protect everyone. So, I think it is just it's one of those shocking things, but I do think we will come back a little bit different, but definitely better. And I think we're getting closer and closer every day to that.
Mhm. Okay, pandemic or not, and let's hope we can left it behind as soon as possible. This is an era of great change, if only because of digitalization. The way of living and the way of communicating and the way of just going on has changed a lot. Tell me, it's a double question. One thing that has changed that you would prefer it hasn't changed so much, and one thing that hasn't changed that you would like to change.
Wow, that's really tough. Well, geez. It's almost, it's almost a two-edged sword, if you will. There's, a great understanding in aging and having lived a long time. And so I see in my father, who is in his 90s, and all the knowledge that he has gained, and even myself, having reached 50 this year, you gain a greater, much better understanding of the world, of business, I mean, I'm better and better at positioning every day. And Al still, I mean, the way he can, see the world and in companies. But you do always, time is so short, right?
Yeah.
Would you like to be young again? Of course.
Yeah.
If I could only take all the knowledge that I have with me.
Yeah.
So that's, it's there again, you have both sides of the coin. It's to be young and to have a future ahead of you, but to have the knowledge that you've gained throughout your life to benefit you is, it's the great enigma of life. And I think you have to, appreciate everything every day, and to see it and have fun with it. And to, we really do enjoy meeting the people and the clients and the media. And most importantly, to have the great joy and experience of seeing people around the world. and have a great worldview of things, and seeing how in this 21st century, the globalism really is coming to fruition, where, you can build a brand anywhere and become a global success. But you do have to, follow the laws of positioning. That goes a long way in helping companies succeed.
Okay, may you do it for a long time.
Yes.
And this is a question I also would like to pose to you. Is about, let's call it the consulting marketplace. Of course, Ries is a worldwide known brand, very important, a lot of prestige and a long career. Of course, your father and you behind you. But it seems that the I don't know what's your perception. The market is pretty crowded now. There's a lot of people positioning themselves as consultants. If you look at LinkedIn, there's a lot of people offering their advice or their knowledge to other people. I don't know, that there's a lot of very, very knowledgeable people everywhere. I don't know. I consider myself that I don't know almost anything. I don't know if you feel the market is pretty crowded or not. Or how do you see it?
Well, sometimes there's no better compliment than imitators. And, it's a little, we talk about, the Rolex watch had a very unique and unusual wristband. And that was really its visual hammer, its visual difference. And at the end of the day, everybody copied the wristband, but they weren't a real Rolex. They were all imitations. And so the idea that people are actually talking about positioning is a benefit in many ways, because it elevates the importance of positioning. Unfortunately, most of them don't get it right. They all offer positioning, and all companies have a positioning statement, but it usually just says, we're a big company, making lots of great products for lots of great consumers and lots of great places. It's very generic. It doesn't stay true to the true idea of positioning, which that a brand needs to narrow its focus to stand for something in the mind. So, for us, sure. I mean, but if we were the only ones talking about positioning wouldn't be a big deal. And so that wouldn't be good. It is helpful that people continue to talk about positioning. And of course, for us, we continue to be the real thing. The originators of positioning back when, Al Ries and his partner, Jack Trout, wrote the book, and, the agency and all of this built a strong foundation. And, it's, you want the real talk of positioning, you go to the people that started it all.
Well, it was a big thing from the beginning, actually.
It was, yeah. No, we've been looking back at the history of it, and it was what's interesting is what's funny is that today it just seems it's such an accepted idea. Of positioning is an important part of the branding process, and having a position and positioning statement and all of these things is very much accepted. But at the time, it was a very controversial, and all the big names of the era, from Ogilvy and all the major media, poo-pooed the idea of positioning. They felt it wasn't important, and there was a lot of fight and controversy. Of course, that only helped fuel the brand itself of positioning. Nothing beats controversy in terms of getting PR attention. That's what drove it, is people saying, well, that's ridiculous. It's the creativity of the advertising that matters, not having the position of the brand be important in the strategy. And so it was fascinating to look back and some of the articles written and to see how, and we did see that in China as well. There was a much controversy at the beginning in talking about is this positioning idea really of value versus just blasting out advertising that talked about your benefit.
Again, how do you feel that those new technological companies, let's call it that way, that have come to life this century, along with the digitalization and technological revolution that we have gone through, now they are some of the most valuable brands and important brands in the world. And how do you feel they have done in terms of positioning? They have done a good job or not? They could have done better.
Well, I think you'll find, very similar to the big brands of the last century. What got them into the mind, what built their fortunes, was a very narrow focus, was a very strong position, was domineering and pioneering a market. Think about Sears, right?
Yeah,
Starting with a catalog, and they were the world's largest retailer, Sears. And then what did they do? Well, they expanded. They were, focused on hard goods, so they got into soft goods, and then they bought stock companies, and they tried to be everything, and
yeah,
fell apart.
yeah,
Absolute disaster. Now, what do we see in the new century? Obviously, the internet has taken over, and the categories. And one particular example, that is fantastic one, is Google. The what Google did was phenomenal. Um, First of all, they didn't have the advantage of being first. They were not the first search engine, and search, and how it relates then to advertising, has become one of the biggest business and revenue drivers in the world. They weren't first, but what did they do? There were other companies that, Yahoo, and they had search, but they also focused on a lot of other things. They had message boards and news, and their homepage was a mess, and search was a tiny box on it. They didn't think
yeah,
search was big enough, as a matter of fact. They were expanding into other things. So Google was like the third search engine out there.
yeah.
But what they did was they were the opposite. Instead of the messy homepage, they had a blank homepage. And all they had was Google and a box to search. They focused on search. And that built them the biggest brand. They focused on search. They built the technology around search. They had a unique and, interesting name, Google, right? Because of all the complexities and variations and, findings of their search. And they got a lot of PR. How do they find it so fast? Because they focused everything on being the best search engine, but not only that, of only focusing with that single
Yeah.
clean homepage on search itself, elevating, if you will, the importance of search. And so the idea of how Google did that is unbelievably, a great case study for any company. Now,
Mhm.
the difference is, what is Google doing today?
Yeah.
Today, they're not following all those strategies. Now, while they do have second brands that are very successful, like, YouTube, many of which they purchase, but they keep separate.
Mm.
They're also expanding, the Google brand itself, and so that can lead, to problems. And but again, when you are so powerful as Google,
Yeah.
weakening it slightly, is unlikely to destroy the company. But the question is, for a new company, you can't be, for example, Amazon is another one. Amazon started by being very narrowly focused. They weren't the world's biggest seller of everything online. No, they sold books, best-selling books at 30% off. That's what they did. I mean, that's a narrow focus. And so that's what built the brand. Now, over time, they've expanded, but they didn't do that until they already had established a strong, narrowly focused brand in the mind. So if you want to be like Amazon, you don't start by doing everything. You start by doing one thing, by having a narrow focus, a narrow distribution. What about Facebook? Today everybody's on Facebook. That's not how they started. They started with only students at Harvard, and then only students at Ivy League, and then only students of colleges and universities. I had to go back and get an email address from Northwestern just so I could get on to Facebook. they were, they were exclusive, and slowly, in terms of rolling it out, and it gave them a perception, difference.
Yeah.
And that's what matters, right? Perception, from their main competitor, what at the time was MySpace.
Yeah. Mm. Okay. Now, what the the issues that you're talking about now, that really was very interesting to listen to you, has much to do with the next question. We are already finishing, Laura. We are not taking many more of your time. And it's a screen. We are living in a screen obsessed world. And I don't know, does it have any relation with communications of brand, with the positioning, with the holding in the mind of people?
With living with
Yeah,
screens?
this world that now is looking at screens all the time.
Yeah. Well,
How do you?
I remember when I was a kid, they were complaining about, TV was ruining us because we were looking at the screen too much. And, before that, it was, people listening to the radio too much. And so I think there's always, when you have, these technological and media revolutions, there's always the naysayers that say it's not good or it's changing this or that. I mean, I think at the end of the day, and that's where, positioning is really a strategic and conceptual concept, that, in terms of how we're relating to the world, it doesn't change that, because it's still what it is the brand stands for. How you go about interacting with it might change, whether, you're buying stuff using your phone, right? Versus going to a store. I mean, if you don't have, what's the reason for going to Lululemon, for example, one of my favorite stores that started as yoga clothes for women. And they've slowly expanded some. They have some men's clothes, but their core is, women who are really into yoga and other fitness, and wear tights and shirts and things. So that core focus of understanding who they are and what they do is integral to their brand. And again, again, you can tie it into what their purpose might be, in terms of exercise and lifestyle. They've also expanded. I'm not sure this is a good idea. They bought Mirror, which is a fitness company, so, or exercise online. I mean, whether or not that makes sense. I mean, that's two very different businesses. One of the problems is that, and you have to understand what your company can handle in terms of of your bandwidth, but other businesses always look much easier than yours for some reason. Even a Peloton, which is the interactive online biking experience. They talked recently to the media. Well, we don't just want to be a bike. We want to be a lifestyle athletic, clothing brand as well. Well, because I guess it looked easy. People like wearing Peloton t-shirts now, but you really want to compete with, Nike and Under Armour and Lululemon. I mean, it looks easy, but it's a lot harder to do. And it's hard to keep up with your own category, let alone straddle yourself between two, totally different categories.
Yeah. Are you very screen addicted yourself or not?
I mean, obviously because of work and email and reports and slides, we do spend a lot of time in front of computer screens, and, I've got my cell phone and do a lot with the apps and everything, and enjoy Netflix and the news media. So yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
So yeah, I do. Yeah, you've got to balance it with, I love getting outdoors and, riding a real bike and swimming and hiking and skiing. And so to do all of it is the greatest joy.
That's good. And now the last question, Laura. I hope not to have been very, very boring with my conversation.
No, not at all.
Last question. Any good book or article or something that you have read recently that you can recommend, that you find is particularly interesting and it could be good for our listeners to read?
I'm trying to think. I think, well, I will say that my favorite publication has always been the Wall Street Journal. And so, I think they do a really good job of reporting and covering companies. And I think understanding, what companies are doing, what they're saying they're going to do, and following that over time can really teach you a lot about branding and marketing. And so following that and keeping up with that, and then making your own decisions, about, whether or not it's the right strategy. Because the company doesn't always know, but I think you can, if you follow the facts and follow,
Yeah.
the companies that are not just today and not in the short term, but in the long term, how those strategies pan out. It's been very interesting, for example, to follow what has gone on in the telecom industry. So we had AT&T that thought that they were going to, be cell phones and internet service, and they were going to combine that with content. Right. That those two would be great together. And they bought, a movie studio, Warner, and, all of these media channels. Well, it was a disaster. And they've now, they're getting rid of it to refocus on what their core strength is. And not be distracted by that, and really actually confusing to customers who just want, they want the best, fastest internet, and then to be able to choose the content. Bundling those things together didn't make sense for the company nor to the consumer. So, seeing those things and seeing how they play out, will teach you a lot. And hopefully, the mistakes to avoid when you're running a company.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay. Well, thank you. It's such a pleasure to connect with you again. And I definitely hope to get back to Spain in the very near future.